Today, he gave
But the court has gone the whole way, said there is an absolute constitutional right to same-sex marriage.
Hurricane Harvey is pelting the Texas coastline.
There is an increasing attack on freedom of religion, speech, and comment.
Welcome to the Issachar Hour, examining law, policy, and culture through the lens of the Judeo-Christian worldview to help you understand the times and know what you ought to do.
Good day, good night, good morning, good evening, whatever part of the day it is and whatever part of the world you are. Welcome to the Issachar Hour on MTM TV. My name is Wayne West, and with me is my wife, Doreen. And today, what are we looking at today?
Today we'll be starting a new topic, which is, can cultural Christianity save the culture?
Yeah.
So we'll be first looking at what is cultural Christianity, and we'll be looking at this discussion through the eyes of a gentleman called Tom Holland.
Yeah.
So we'll see what he says about cultural Christianity and what his opinion is about whether it can save the culture.
Yeah. And of course, this comes out of a series that we did before when we looked at the conversion of Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who was an atheist. And her mentor was...
She was a Muslim and then an atheist.
Right, that's right. She was Muslim, became atheist, and then she converted to Christianity. And her mentor was one of the, probably regarded as the chief of the new atheists, who was Richard Dawkins. And of course, he was shocked and disappointed at the fact that she became a Christian, but agreed with her that Christianity was important in the culture, for Western culture.
Although he ridiculed the entire Christian creed,
right,
which makes him silly in my opinion.
Right,
but anyway,
but he realized that if the Western democracies like the United Kingdom and the Netherlands and all these European nations lose Christianity, they will be losing something that's very important. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali also,
and they'll be overrun by Islam.
Right,
and he's very afraid of that.
He's very afraid of that. So, yeah. So, what is cultural Christianity? What would you say cultural Christianity is?
Well, from what I gathered from listening to Tom Holland and also from reading his book, Dominion, which we'll talk about later, cultural Christianity is a situation in which, for example, in Western democracies, the public policies, the laws, the ethos, the social ethos, the norms of a society are Christian in their foundation.
Yeah. Christian values.
Christian values run the society.
Right.
Christian values are accepted as the norm in the society. However, that's all it is. It's a cultural thing. It's not linked to any personal commitment or belief or conversion. It is just a culture of the norms to which Christianity would lend itself.
I think that, for example, I think it's Switzerland. Switzerland, they have a holiday for Pentecost, but most of the people, they are atheists and they don't really care.
Well, they go to the beach, I suppose. Yes. So,
and also the other thing is that Christianity itself has been rejected because of the whole thing about evolution. There's no need for God. We came here not by creation, but by evolution. Although we keep saying on this program, there's no evidence for that.
Well, I think the point is that, for example, Richard Dawkins, he ridicules all the Christian creeds. He ridicules virgin birth, the death, resurrection, creation. He ridicules all of those things.
So you think that it's counterintuitive compared to what is
it's
natural
unscientific and silly.
Yeah.
However, he does know that once those cultural values linked to that system and those beliefs, once they go, he's in a pickle.
Yeah.
And as Ayaan Hirsi Ali herself asked him and challenged him, is that you are in your ivory tower creating a vacuum.
Yeah.
Because you're taking Christianity out and you're creating a vacuum.
Yeah. So what's going to fill that space?
You have to think about what is going, and you have no alternative that's workable to fill that space, to build a sound society.
Right, because atheism basically says there is no God. But
and if there's no God, everything is permissible.
Everything is permissible, and if everything is, and this is why they are unable to counter anything. Exactly. Because if there is no God and everything is permissible, then Islam is permissible.
Exactly.
And
but they don't like it.
But they don't like it.
Okay. So well, the first video we're going to look at is with Tom Holland, and he's speaking with a well-known Christian scholar N.T. Wright,
Yeah.
very well-known man. I've read many of his books myself. He's Anglican, I believe.
He is Anglican.
But we wouldn't hold it against him.
Yeah, N.T. Wright was a bishop of Durham, part
Yeah.
of the Anglican
No,
community.
we shouldn't hold it against him, though.
No, there
Anyway,
are
in spite of what Anglicanism is becoming these
there
days.
are Christians in the Anglican community,
Still are, yes.
and he's one.
So right, so Tom Holland is speaking. I think it's a podcast of some sort called Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he's talking with N.T. Wright. So Tom Holland is fairly young, isn't he? He's 50s,
Yeah,
he's in his
so.
50s. And he's an author. He has written many, many books.
Over 70 books.
Right, imagine that. And on basically our historical nature.
Yeah.
Medieval history, antiquity, and so on. And he also has.
I think he's regarded as one of the best New Testament scholars.
You mean N.T. Wright?
N.T. Wright.
Oh,
yeah.
but I'm talking about Tom Holland. So N.T. Wright is definitely one of the best known New Testament scholars.
Yeah.
But I was saying that Holland is a man in his 50s. He was born in 68, and he has written many, many books.
Yeah.
Of a historical nature.
Well, he used to write fiction before, you know.
So I hear.
And
so I
then he switched to non-fiction. Yeah.
Right. So, and his books have received awards.
Yes,
many
absolutely.
literary awards. For
Yeah.
example, he won the prize in 2004 for the book called Rubicon, which, as you can tell, dealt with the Roman Republic and the ancient Romans.
Interestingly, as I think we were discussing before, he didn't study history per se,
Right.
but he's writing a lot about history.
Well, he's a brilliant person. When you're bright, you can do anything well
That's
if
right.
you put your mind to it. But also, some of the books have been critiqued, but many of them have won awards and so on, right? And in particular, he wrote a book about the rise of Islam called In the Shadow of the Sword,
Yeah.
which was interesting. I've not read that book, but I would love to read that. He's written a lot of books about the rise and fall of Caesar, Claudius, Nero, 4 emperors. He wrote a book about 4 Roman emperors. And also to bring us back to what we are dealing with the issue of cultural Christianity and what the culture owes to Christianity.
That's right.
He wrote a book called Dominion, or The Making of the Western Mind, okay, or How the Christian Revolution Made the World. Okay, so it's different titles. So the book is Dominion. I would encourage people to read that book.
Yes.
It's excellent, and it had a significant impact on Ian Hersey Ali, who we spoke about earlier. That book made a significant impact on her in terms of what Christianity, what the culture owes to Christianity. And so we'll hear what Tom Holland has to say about whether cultural Christianity, what the culture owes to Christianity.
And just to make one statement before we go to the video is that this is important for, we are in the Caribbean. And although in the Caribbean it appears as though Christianity is still a considered and dominant worldview, that it will continue to be so, the fact is that many young people are not really exposed to the Bible. They don't know the Bible stories.
And it's called dechurching.
That's right.
There's a dechurching that's occurring in the bigger democracies like in the US and so on. It's a dechurching.
Right.
People are not going to church anymore. And there's a dechurching happening in our communities too. And so we need to be careful because we can go on assuming that Jamaica or some other Caribbean countries, a Christian country, has Christian ideals. And then one day we'll find that, it's like in Nazi Germany, which we'll come to. It was a nominally Christian nation.
That's right.
And then Hitler arose in it. So that's why we have to be careful.
So we have to prepare, 1, to continue evangelizing, and 2, also to be prepared for the post-Christian society, which is where this issue arises.
If possible, to do the work now to make sure we don't end up there.
So let's go into that first video where Tom Holland begins to appreciate that he had Christianity wrong.
Yeah, because he was an atheist.
He's
still an atheist, he says. Yeah. And he thought, I think this is what the listeners need to know.
Yeah.
He assumed, like many secular humanists do, he assumed that the cultural values that he lived by, and he held dear, those were the product of Greek and Roman thought.
Yeah.
And he assumed that for many years, but then in later years, he began to see that there was no such thing.
And maybe because of the fact that he started doing history, researching history.
Yes, he began to realize that there was no such thing.
Greeks and the Romans.
They were the ripple effects and the sequelae of Christian thought. And so this is the road he's on. And at the end of before we finish today, I'm going to give my opinion about where he is on that road. For the time being, he's on a road departing from the thought that the values that he holds
Yeah.
are Greek and Roman, you know, like democracy, human rights.
Yes, right. So let's take a look at that.
Cicero's great contemporary Caesar is, by some accounts, slaughtering 1 million Gauls and enslaving another 1 million in the cause of boosting his political career. And far from feeling in any way embarrassed about this, he's kind of promoting it. And so when he holds his triumph, people are going through the streets of Rome carrying billboards, boasting about how many people he's killed. And this is a really terrifyingly alien world. And the more you look at it, the more you realize that it is built on systematic exploitation. So the entire economy is founded on slave labor.
Right.
The sexual economy is founded on the absolute right of free Roman males to have sex with anyone that they want, any way that they like. And in almost every way, this is a world that is unspeakably cruel to our way of thinking. And so this worried me more and more. And it was kind of like, I was thinking, well, you know, I'm clearly not, as I'd vaguely imagined, the heir of the Greeks and the Romans in any way, really. And so where am I coming from? And it was like a kind of itch, you know, you get on your back and you think, you can't find it. And this was then enhanced for me by then writing a book about late antiquity and the emergence of Islam from the late religious, the religious and imperial context of late antiquity. And again, finding in Islam a profound quality of the alien, that, you know, there were aspects of Islam that were very familiar, but there were many aspects of it that, again, seemed deeply, deeply alien. And I began to realize that actually, in almost every way, I am Christian. And I began to realize that actually Paul, although in many ways he seems a much less familiar figure than Cicero, the kind of, you know, urbane man with his property problems, you know, Paul never had any property; he just made tents. Yes. That in almost every, you know, what is it, seven? That is the 7 letters that are people conventionally people absolutely accept. That, you know, and as Tom Wright was saying, you know, this is not a very lengthy amount of writing, but compacted into this very, very small amount of writing was almost everything that explains the modern world.
Well, the Western world, as we take for granted. Yes,
but also the way that the West has then moved on to shape, you know, concepts like international law, for instance. So the fact, you know, concepts of human rights, all these kind of things, ultimately, they don't go back to Greek philosophers. They don't go back to Roman imperialism. They go back to Paul.
Some of the humanists
Paul really
and atheists,
is, you know, his letters, I think, are, along with the 4 Gospels, the most influential, the most impactful, the most revolutionary writings that have emerged from the ancient world.
When you penned that article, I think it was for the New Statesman, where you said what I got wrong, and you sort of came out, as it were, and said, as far as my values and, you know, background are concerned, I am a Christian. It was interesting to see the response to that, because I saw lots of atheists and humanists saying, oh, hang on, you know, democracy, that goes back to the Greeks, you know, don't pretend that Christianity gave us everything we're grateful for. But you honestly think that actually people simply haven't appreciated just how much we owe to the Judeo-Christian?
I think I mean, if we're talking of Paul, I think of him as a kind of depth charge, deep beneath the foundations of the classical world. And, you know, it's not anything that you particularly notice if you're, you know, in Corinth or Alexandria. And then you start feeling this kind of rippling outwards. And, you know, by the time you get to the 11th century in Latin Christendom, everything has changed. And you have this, I think essentially what Paul's significance is that he sets up ripple effects of revolution throughout Western history. So the 11th century, where with the Papal Revolution, essentially it establishes this idea that society has to be reborn, reconfigured, that vested interests have to be torn down. And then the Reformation, what we call the Reformation, is a further ripple effect of that, and the Enlightenment is a further ripple effect of that. And very interesting. You know, it spilled out so much that now in the 21st century we don't even realize where these ripple effects are coming from. We just take them for granted.
Right. So in that first installment, in that first video, the essential point that Holland is making is that Western cultural values that we have now are not based on Roman or Greek values, but on Christianity.
Yeah.
That is the heart of what he's saying.
That's what he's
saying.
saying.
And he goes back into history, into ancient history to make some examples and to prove his point. Yeah. For one thing, he says that look at how Caesar became great.
Yeah, by
Caesar became great by slaughtering the Gauls, by enslaving them, and the whole economy of ancient Rome was based on exploitation and oppression. Yeah. That was the whole economy. In addition, he also makes an important point, which we have also talked about on Issachar Hour, about the sexual mores at the time. Yeah. That the free Roman man had an unfettered access to anyone, male or female, for sex, to be used for sex. That's right. And that Christianity made a big difference there as well. And also we know, and we've said this before, that infanticide, exposure of children, rejection of children was accepted.
Yeah, our world is an interesting a little mixture of those things. At the moment.
Just because we're changing, we're shifting. Yeah. And he said that the ancient world was a world of cruelty.
A lot of cruelty. And in fact, when you go to see those movies of that time, when Caesar returned from Rome with the slaves and the people who were captured, and he would have this great parade. But what they're celebrating it really is him killing all these people, bringing them in as slaves and so on. But Holland is saying that, yes, people who counter him and say, we did get some of our things from the Greeks and the Romans, particularly the Greeks in terms of democracy. It is true. The Greeks gave democracy, but they didn't say how the persons in a democracy should conduct themselves with respect to other people. Because I think one of the big things that Holland is bringing out about the Christian influence
is how we treat others.
How we treat others.
How we are supposed to
treat others. In the Greek and ancient Greek world, you can treat others no matter anyhow.
Yeah.
But Christianity brings a new ethos which comes out of the epistles and the gospels.
No, and it comes out of more than the epistles and the gospels, because even in the Deuteronomy, God said, treat the slave and the foreigner well.
That's right.
Because you are slaves and foreigners. He said, if you mistreat them, I will judge you. And I'll punish you. So it goes back even further than that.
So he described, I like the way he described Paul's epistles.
Yes.
He said they're like a depth charge, so they take place deep.
Explode way down, but they give a ripple effect.
Yes. And he's saying that though the epistles and the effects of the epistles and the gospels led to a change in that you can't treat people
anyhow you want, and get away with it.
And of course that comes back to, in the beginning, God made man in his image.
And that is the heart of it. He says that's the heart of equality. That's the heart of sympathy and justice. That's the heart of human rights. That's the heart of everything that we hold dear.
But one of the challenges we are facing in today's world is that people want to create human rights that defy what God wants. And a lot of the human rights code that they create around sexual, their sexual agenda. But you cannot really have real human rights. And it's interesting, he recognizes this. Unless all human beings are inherently valuable.
And that value only comes from being made in the image of God. You can have no other basis. And what he said, I like what he said, is that the St. Paul's writings and the Gospels together are some of the most revolutionary writings of the ancient world.
Absolutely.
Because they turned everything upside down. And this is why what the people said about the Christians in the early period. Said these people have turned the world upside down. That's in fact what they said.
Yeah, and yes, it's difficult for us to appreciate
because we were born in it.
Because we are born in it. The thinking of Christianity, where you consider the person who is downtrodden, who is a victim, you consider
you are obligated to do this. It's not even like you have a choice. You're supposed to do this.
And as we go through this program, people will see how that contrasts with the other way of thinking.
Yeah. So Holland is saying, no, he realizes now that the values that he holds and cherishes are the values that come from the early Christian world, not the ancient Roman Empire. Because Christianity turned the sexual mores upside down. Yeah. The Roman father could kill his child.
Absolutely.
He had the right to do that. He had the right to kill his child. And so, it's totally upside down. We turned it over completely. And he's saying that what we are taking for granted now are the ripple effects of that change.
I want to just read something he said. In 2016, he wrote an article entitled, "I Was Wrong About Christianity" for the New Statesman. in which he said he had come to realize he was incorrect to have thought that in the past his own Western values derived from the Greece and Rome of antiquity and owed nothing to Christianity. Familiarity with the biblical narrative, the crucifixion, has dulled our sense of just how completely novel a deity Christ was.
Revolutionary.
Christianity is the principal reason why, by and large, most of us who live in post-Christian societies still take for granted that it is nobler to suffer than to inflict suffering.
Exactly.
It is why we generally assume that every human life is of equal value. In my morals and ethics, I have learned to accept that I am not Greek or Roman at all, but thoroughly and proudly Christian.
Well, I'll have something to say about that before we end, whether he's indeed thoroughly Christian.
So where does he go from here?
Well, anyway, but the point is that the last point I want to make about Holland, though, is that his father was an atheist. But his mother was an Anglican. Right. And not only was she a
godly Anglican,
she was a devout Anglican.
We want to distinguish because Anglicans are not the same.
So she was a devout Anglican.
All Anglicans are not the same.
Who modeled for him Christian values. And so that's an important thing to learn. Compassion, decency, goodness, and so on. So she modeled that for him, right? And so that's the upbringing that he had. But when he became an adult, he disavowed. He said there's no evidence for God, which is a ridiculous statement. And so he said, I've seen no proof for God. And so he kicked that out. Okay. So now we see that he's like Ian Hersey Ali, but not to the same extent like Ian, I think.
Yeah, well, he's working it out.
He has turned around and
he's working it out.
Making his way back home. Yeah.
So we get to the second video.
Right.
Let's get to that.
Should we say the second video who he's talking to? In the second video, he's talking to John Anderson.
Yeah.
John Anderson, he was a deputy
Prime Minister of Australia
at one time. He's an Australian, and so he's talking to John Anderson now about how the cross changed history.
Yeah.
So that's what he's going to talk about. So we can have a look at that. How did the cross change history?
Yeah. What do you think are some of the most significant changes that Christianity has wrought in the culture that we live in today?
Well, there are so many.
Yeah.
That it's all. I mean, that's a kind of very difficult question because there are so many. But I would say to look at the most obvious one because it's the symbol of Christianity. If you look at the cross, it's such an odd thing to have as a kind of focus of veneration and to have as a kind of fundamental symbol of a civilization, because a cross is an emblem of torture. And to the Romans, it was an emblem of their power to torture to death their inferiors. So crucifixion was inflicted on those who opposed Roman power in provinces, but it's also the paradigmatic fate that is visited on slaves who rebel against their masters. And everyone who's seen Spartacus will remember the great line of crosses lining the Appian Way. These are billboards advertising the ability of Rome to crush rebellion by the weak. And so therefore it serves as a symbol of the power of the powerful over the powerless. Now Christianity absolutely upends that. It says, actually, the cross is a symbol of the powerless triumphing over the powerful. It's the symbol of the slave triumphing over the master, of the victim triumphing over the torturer. And this is such a radical notion that it's hard adequately to express how radical it is. And the idea that the last shall be first, that there is an inherent dignity and value and indeed power in being a victim, this is something that would have been utterly bewildering to the Romans. And it takes a kind of long time for first the Roman world and then the world of the kind of Germanic conquerors in the West and so on to properly synthesize and understand it. And that's why I think in a way, we are so habituated to it that it takes an effort to understand just how weird, just how strange that idea is. And it's why actually I think the modern who has most profoundly and unsettlingly understood just how radical that idea is, how radical the idea that the cross, of all things, should become the emblem of a new civilization, was a man who was not just an atheist, but a radically hostile anti-Christian atheist, Friedrich Nietzsche. And Nietzsche said this is a repellent thing. Nietzsche identified with the power and the glory and the beauty of classical civilization. And he thought that Christianity notoriously was a religion for slaves. And he saw in the emblem of Christ nailed to the cross a kind of disgusting subversion of the ideals of the classical world, a privileging of those who properly should be ground beneath the heels of the mighty. And he saw it as a kind of sickness that then, it kind of infected the blonde beast, as he called it, that this, the primordial figure of the warrior gets corrupted and turned into a monkish figure who's sick with poverty and sympathy for the poor and the oppressed. And Nietzsche thought it was disgusting. Now, those ideas, however vulgarized, of course, feed into by a very septic sump, which is that of fascism.
Yeah.
And fascism, I think, was the most radical and revolutionary movement that Europe has seen since the age of Constantine, because unlike the French Revolution, unlike the Russian Revolution, it doesn't only target institutional Christianity, it targets the moral and ethical fundamentals of Christianity. Because the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, are still preaching that idea that the victim should be raised up from the dust and that the oppressor should be humbled into the dust. It's still preaching the idea that the first shall be last and the last shall be first, just as Christ had done. The Nazis do not buy into that. The Nazis buy into the Nietzschean idea that the weak are weak and should be treated as weak, as contemptible, as something to be crushed. And I think the horror of that for us in the post-war world is the measure of how profoundly Christian we remain. And one of the reasons, I think, why institutional Christianity fades in the wake of the Second World War is that, in a sense, fascism, Nazism, gives us an alternative myth, but it's still a very Christian one. The fact that Hitler has replaced Satan and Auschwitz has replaced hell doesn't alter the fact that we understand Nazism to be the quintessence of evil for deeply, deeply Christian reasons.
So he's talking to this guy, John Anderson, who is quite a philosopher of the world. He had a very excellent YouTube channel and so on, where he interviews people. He is conservative, meaning that he's not into, he doesn't know what a woman is and all that sort of thing.
Is he a Christian or just a cultural Christian?
I don't know if he's Christian, but he certainly has the traditional values.
All right.
So Tom Holland now, that he's talking about how the cross
changed history.
And again, the cross was, as he said, a symbol of Roman brutality.
Roman power.
Roman power.
To crush you.
If you disrespect Rome.
Not only to crush you, but to impose the ultimate pain and the ultimate humiliation if you dared to go to disobey Rome.
He spoke about a movie called Spartacus, which is about a
You have seen that, haven't you? And you like it?
Yeah, I like sci-fi.
It's a violent movie.
I like sci-fi and those kind of Roman.
That's a violent movie.
Well, Spartacus was a slave who decided to revolt against the Roman Empire. And of course, eventually the Romans are powerful military. They brought the revolution to an end. And then they just crucified maybe hundreds, maybe thousands of people. And he was saying that what Rome did, he did is played them on crucifixes on the Appian Way or whatever it is, so that anybody passing there would
see what you get if you mess with Rome.
Don't test
and don't mess.
But he said it's interesting that cross
symbol
became the symbol for civilization.
For a whole civilization after Alexander the Great. After Alexander the Great became a symbol of a whole civilization.
Well, after the Romans, after Christ died, the Christianity.
Well, I think Alexander the Great is the one who started that when he became a Christian, making the cross.
No, not Alexander the Great. You're talking about Emperor Constantine.
Constantine, sorry.
Emperor Constantine.
He started. He turned it around.
Emperor Constantine, because
under this, he said, under this symbol, we are going to rule.
Because he said in his battle, he had a battle.
Saw a cross.
He said, you will win under this symbol.
Yeah.
And so he took the symbol of the cross.
Constantine, right.
Emperor Constantine.
Right.
So the thing about it is that he's saying that this symbol which represents the thorough abuse of human beings, if you challenge power, became the symbol of civilization. And he said people like Friedrich Nietzsche, who was an atheist, who lived in the 1800s, was offended by this rubbish. In other words, why should the lesser people become important? Why should society...
And why should the symbol of how weak and how vulnerable they are become anything?
That's right.
And direct a society.
So Friedrich Nietzsche was the kind of atheist who was saying there is no way that the weak should become important to our civilization, which is what Christianity said, that you must take care of the weak, do unto others.
Not only that, the man on the cross, not the one putting the nails in, but the one on the cross was the one that turned things upside down.
That's right.
Because his disciples who turned things up. So the man on the cross became, in early in the day, as we talk about the cross, time was divided by the appearance of that man on the cross into BC and AC. Nowadays they are BC and so on, before the common era.
But I said BC, that man before Christ.
Absolutely.
I am not saying before the common era. It's BC and
but
AD.
I'm saying history itself was divided into two periods based on not the man putting anybody on the cross, not the emperor who put him on the cross, but the man who was on the cross. And that is what Holland is saying. It is weird.
It's weird.
That such a symbol should be the symbol of a whole civilization.
And he is saying that the thinking that came out of Christianity is so pervasive that really, if you look at even the revolutions that reject Christianity, like the Russian Revolution, which is atheist and rejects Christianity,
they still say the weak man must be brought up out of the dust.
That's right. It's seeking to achieve
what Christianity
is hoping to achieve. In fact,
which is the reversal.
In reality, the communist revolution was supposed to replace Christianity, because it was now effecting what Christianity was saying.
Aimed to do.
And so on. So I never really thought of it that way, but I think he's absolutely right. That what those people in the French Revolution...
They were using a perverse way to do what Christianity promised to do.
And then in this discussion with Anderson, John Anderson, he was bringing out the point that the Nazis now, who had a different type of revolution, wanted to go back to what obtained in the past, where
then they not only reject Christianity itself, but they reject all the ethical and moral fundamentals of Christianity. Unlike the French and the Russian, they want to say, no, we're not having any of this. We are rejecting the institution and we are rejecting the values from that institution.
And we're going to crush the weak.
If you're weak, you're going to be crushed.
That's why Hitler wanted his Hitler Youths.
Yes,
and their pure Aryan blood.
And Nietzsche talked about power, the importance of power, right? And so,
but I want to just add to the thing here, let the listeners know that it is said that the fascism which came out of the Nazis and so on was rooted in the way Friedrich Nietzsche, who was an atheist in the 1800s, taught. But some people think that Nietzsche wasn't quite as extreme as that.
He wasn't as extreme as anti-Semitism, which is what characterized the Nazis.
And he was not as nationalistic as that. And they think that
but he was very much an atheist, and he very much had contempt
for the Christian concept that the weak should be looked after. But his sister apparently did some manipulation of his work and sold that to the Nazis.
Nietzsche was a very brilliant man, by the way.
He was, but
a twisted mind and
But he
and got mentally ill at the end.
Yeah, but he understood that you couldn't get rid of Christianity
and hold on to its values,
hold on to Christian concepts.
Because he said once you kill God, you wouldn't know up from down.
That's right.
Right and wrong. You wouldn't be able to differentiate those things anymore. So he was clairvoyant in that he saw what the result would be of a rejection of God.
Whilst people like Richard Dawkins and
they don't see
are
it up to now.
seeking to try to reject God and yet still hold on to Christian values apart from the ones that they don't like, which is like the things about same-sex and so on and so on.
One of the points Holland makes, I think the discussion is that since the Second World War, the Western world has kind of had Hitler as the embodiment of evil rather than the devil and Satan. Hitler is the embodiment of evil.
Yeah.
So
and Auschwitz, where they had the
Auschwitz is the embodiment of
hell,
of
rather
hell,
than
right?
hell itself.
But however, he's saying that the reasons why we can reject Hitler, fascism, and Nazism is for Christian reasons.
It's because
they're in stark contrast to the Christian ideals.
Yeah. So he's saying that the Christian ideals permeate.
They're still
Western
relevant
society,
and they still permeate.
And Western society has to determine
what they are going to do with them
if they reject Christianity, and that is a very important.
So we're going to look at the third video now, which is the same John Anderson talking to Holland, and they are going on more to talk about the fascism and so on. You know, what will be the outcome of rejecting Christianity and so on, and they also talk importantly, I think, about the modern atheists, and what their problem is. What is the problem of the modern atheists? So we look at this third video now.
I'm sure you're right. Little known sort of factoid from history is that the first time that Mussolini met Hitler, he gave him a leather-bound set of Nietzsche's writings.
Yeah.
Apparently.
Yeah.
And it's really significant to my way of thinking, because I think, as you say, he loathed Christianity, but he was very aware that its collapse might have much deeper consequences than the other, if I can use this word, trendy atheists of the day realised. I wonder whether we're still not grappling with what's really left.
We're not at all. And the reason for that is precisely the way in which Nietzsche's philosophy fed into fascism. So Nietzsche was particularly contemptuous of English liberals. He saw it as a peculiarly kind of English disease. So I'm sure he would have included Australians under that umbrella. And he was contemptuous of the idea that he associated with kind of people like George Eliot, that you could get rid of Christian belief but still have the kind of superstructure of Christian ideals and Christian philosophy and Christian teachings and Christian assumptions. And I think that he would, if he were alive today, he would be as contemptuous of Richard Dawkins or A.C. Grayling as he was of George Eliot. And he would say of both of them and of most atheists in the West today that they are basically Christians. Nietzsche saw humanists, communists, liberals, people who may have defined themselves against Christianity as being absolutely in the fundamentals Christian. And I think he's right about that, because I think that in a sense, so much of there's a sense in which atheism that doesn't repudiate the kind of the ethics and the morals and the values of Christianity is really simply a logical endpoint of a trend within Protestantism. And indeed Christianity generally, because going right the way back to the Hebrew prophets, who precede Christianity, what they are preaching is a kind of desacralization of the world. They look at springs and trees and mountaintops and they say there are no gods there, there are no spirits there. This is just stock and stone. God is up there. And this is something that obviously Christians inherit, so that when Christian missionaries go out into the dripping woods of Saxony, they chop down the great trees that are sacred to the Norse gods, the Nordic gods, the Germanic gods, and say, look, these are just trees. Yeah. And they chop them up and turn them into chapels. And in a sense, what then happens in the Reformation, when you get Protestant reformers looking at the Catholic Church and saying, well, this is all just hocus pocus, this is mumbo jumbo, this is ludicrous magic. We must get rid of this kind of magical thinking. We must restore the church to its kind of natural purity. That sense that superstition must be banished, that idols must be overthrown, is something that, of course, in the long run will be picked up by atheist radicals. But whether it's in the French Revolution or whether it's in kind of new atheist movement in the 21st century, they're still basically cleaving to the kind of the fundamental Christian ideas. It's just and the very idea that you should banish superstition, get rid of idols, that doing that will bring you into enlightenment, that the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. I mean, this is a kind of Christian idea through and through. And as I say, I think the idea that having banished, the supernatural from springs and trees, you end up banishing the supernatural from everything, is a kind of logical endpoint.
Right. So an interesting thing that I did not know before in this discussion is when John Anderson said that Mussolini gave Hitler, when they met, a leather-bound set of Nietzsche's works.
Yeah.
And we know that Nietzsche had a profound effect on Hitler. We know that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in due time, about how Hitler youth reflected those values. Yeah. But Nietzsche, as we have said before, clearly said, Christianity is silly and weak and stupid and not worthy of any consideration.
Yeah.
However, we must know that when we get rid of it, we are going to get rid of everything that comes with it.
Yeah,
he talked about the Ubermensch. The Superman. Who the man of power.
Yeah.
Who cares about nothing.
And who will stamp his authority.
Will crush you. Right. Right. So
this is a very important discussion, because a lot of people are moving away from Christianity. And they must understand, when you move away from Christianity, where are you going to?
And not only that, a lot of people who reject Christian values, especially Christian sexual ethics and values, they have this idea that, your truth and my truth, what I like and what you like, and they're all equally good.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be all equally good, In the long run, the powerful are the ones who are going to decide what is good and what stays.
Absolutely.
It's not going to be, everybody's not going to have the chance to say, I will keep my truth and you keep your truth.
No.
It's not going to be like that at all.
No.
The powerful elite, the Ubermensch,
that's right.
that is who's going to decide what goes.
That's right.
Okay?
That's
so
right.
relativism is a temporary placeholder.
Yeah.
It's not going to be there forever. It cannot be there forever. Right? Yeah. So Nietzsche loathed Christianity and Christians. We know this. However, he also loathed a second group of people.
Yeah.
He loathed liberals who thought they could dispense with Christianity but keep Christian values. He loathed them because he, unlike them, he acknowledged the consequences of the collapse of Christianity.
Yeah.
And they don't acknowledge it, So he was contemptuous of them, I think.
And wisely so, because you cannot build on what you don't believe.
Yeah,
you have no commitment.
They want a lovely house of the Christian values, democracy, freedom of speech, human rights, but no foundation. There's no foundation under it.
What they're going to get is
something else.
It's fascism, eventually, where the powerful
decapitation. The Muslims will cut their heads off, which serves them right. So Nietzsche is saying that people like Richard Dawkins would have been loathed by Nietzsche.
Yes.
You'd have had contempt.
And he also referenced Grayling, who is the president of the British Humanist Society.
Ridiculous. And the model that Dawkins finds himself in was clearly visible when we had several shows about Ian Hersey Ali.
Yeah.
It showed the model he was in, because she challenged him. Yeah. She said, what do you have to replace that? And he had nothing.
What they would like to believe is that evolutionary theory, because of survival,
and humanism, and man will get better and better. But man has not gotten better and better. Man has gotten worse and worse.
That's right.
There are more wars, there's more cruelty.
That's true.
There's more everything.
Because the Enlightenment was supposed to bring in science and so on.
And then the World War II.
World War I and World War II.
After it.
So obviously.
So that did nothing.
Yeah.
But another last important point I want to talk about, which I think Holland made, is that in a funny kind of twisted way, what happened is that the Hebrew prophets said there's no spirit in any tree or anything.
The polytheistic thing about,
the God of the tree, the God of the stone, the God of the forest, the God of the river.
Got rid of that.
Yeah, that was in Egypt, and the plagues were meant to ridicule that anyway.
Right.
But there were no such gods. Those things were inanimate objects, and there were no gods in
just
them.
Obeying laws.
So just throw that out. And he said the missionaries, for example, they went to these cultures. They would say the tree is just a tree.
Yeah.
They would chop it down and make a chapel with it to show.
And the tree is just a tree.
So what he's saying that with the Reformation, which they rejected out of Catholic mysticism, like indulgences, the soul will spring from purgatory when you put the money in the coffer.
This person foreskin that you could pray to.
Pray to foreskin and all of that. That they rejected that in the Reformation.
To restore.
That was
to get back
gobbledygook.
Yeah.
And now he says, in a funny kind of perverse way, the modern atheists have stretched that to say there is no superstition, there are no gods,
and no supernatural,
no spirit, and no supernatural. So which I think was an interesting way of thinking about it.
So we come to the last video that we'll be looking at today,
and this is a question that we are raising today.
Right.
Finally,
how do you respond?
Can cultural Christianity save the culture? That is the topic of today that we're going to look at in the last video. And in this video, it's a show called Speak Life, and it's run by a man called Glenn Scrivener. And this man, Glenn Scrivener, is speaking to Tom Holland. Can cultural Christianity save the culture?
Nominal Christianity will not save us. You might think you need Christianity in order to save the culture. That is to put the cart before the horse. A merely cultural Christianity can leave you in some very un-Christian places. Salt can preserve meat, but not if it loses its savor. And Christianity can preserve cultures, but not if it is merely a cultural Christianity. We need the salty kind, or it might prove worse than nothing. Hi, I'm Glenn from Speak Life. We like to see all things through the lens of Jesus. Has Christianity built the modern West? I think increasingly people are starting to see the answer to that question is an unequivocal yes. The thesis of Tom Holland's book Dominion seems to have carried the day, as many people are coming to see that the values we hold as natural and obvious and universal are nothing of the sort. They have come from the very contingent developments of Christianity down through the ages. The high-profile conversion of Ayaan Hirsi Ali last year mentions Tom Holland and his marvelous book Dominion a number of times, as she came to see that the values she holds dear are not the result simply of Enlightenment values, but that those Enlightenment values themselves are the fruit of much deeper roots that go all the way back to the Bible. So then the question comes, if our culture has been shaped by Christianity, what is the future of Western civilization now that there is a grand de-churching and rapid de-Christianization? Does Western culture need Christianity? It's a question that I put to Tom Holland at an event that we held back in 2022 with Paul Vanderklay and Tom Holland, and I asked him the question, what is the future? If Christianity has got us where we are, do we no longer need it anymore? And he laid out 3 different options as we go forwards.
There are various kind of possibilities, and one is absolutely that Christianity has played its part. It's kind of like the rocket booster, got us through the atmosphere, and now liberalism can just sail its merry way on through the inky vastness of space. So maybe
into oblivion.
Yeah, so maybe that's fine, or maybe as basically Nietzsche argued, you can't really have Christian values without Christian belief. And in the long run, if you're not watering the soil, the bloom will fade. And I think, and the implications of that would be very alarming. And we have seen what that might mean. We've seen what that might mean, because fascism was all about the utter rejection, not just of institutional Christianity, as the French Revolution was and the Russian Revolution, but about the rejection of its core values. So the value that there is no Greek or Jew. Of course, the Nazis completely thought there was differences between the Greek and Jew, and the rejection of the idea that the strong have a duty of care to the weak.
So those are the first 2 values in my book, The Air We Breathe. So equality, that all people share a radical human equality in the eyes of God, and then that becomes secularized as in the eyes of society, in the eyes of the law, that radical equality based on the image of God that is in all people. And the second value in the book, The Air We Breathe, is compassion, the idea that a society should be judged best that treats its weakest members best. And so equality and compassion are at the core of a Christian identity. Therefore, as a society becomes less and less Christian, then those twin values of equality and compassion will fade, and fascist ideals start to become more and more believable, because there does seem to be a default in the human heart towards power, towards the strong, and therefore the elimination of the weak. And of course, there's this biological urgency, isn't there? The survival of the fittest and therefore the sacrifice of the weakest. So Tom is saying option one, as we move forwards, is maybe we can just have humanism without the Christianity. That doesn't seem to be the thing that Tom himself believes. The second option is that you've got this kind of Nietzschean idea that with the fading of Christianity, a will to power will rise up and replace Christianity.
And that there's value in weakness. The Nazis obviously completely rejected that. And I think the shock and the horror of that was so intense that we, as a society, are now kind of living off the capital of that. But it may be that that will fade, and the kind of, I think the kind of natural instinct of humans, which is to worship the strong, will come back in. And particularly if things start to go really, really wrong with the economy and with, go wronger than they already is. We may enter very dark times from a Christian perspective. Yes. But the third option is to make a virtue of the fact that, the Nietzschean point that you can't really have Christian, that these values are all fundamentally theological. If you want to believe in human rights, the point will come when, and I think you can see that already happening in India, say in Turkey, where people will turn around and say, what about that, or the secular or anything like that? Yeah. These are just kind of mad Western imports. And people who want to defend that will have to start looking at the history, the origins of these things, and that may well lead them to come back to the church. That's certainly the path that I've been on, is, I recognizing that these beliefs that are important to me, that the rocket fuel for these beliefs is not what I thought they were. Mm-hmm. And I want that rocket fuel, therefore, to be as strong as it possibly can be. Mm-hmm. And there's always the risk of identifying your own feelings with the broad sweep of history. So I don't want to do that. But I think, but it may well be that what I'm going through is something that lots of people are going through, because we're all experiencing the same kind of thing. So maybe it won't, maybe it will, maybe Christianity will die, as John Lennon said. Maybe it will mutate into something, the worship of the strong, the validation of differences between, the abandonment of the idea that all human beings have an equal value. Or maybe the sense of strain that these values and beliefs are coming under will prompt a return to the source.
Right, so the heart of this, I think the central core of this video is the three options that we have now. Yeah. What to do with Christianity, and what are the likely consequences of what we do with Christianity. Yeah. And so these three options are: one, okay, Christianity has taken us this far to a liberal democracy, right? So human rights.
Because you think human beings are important in and of themselves.
Are value, yes.
So you can't treat them anyhow you want. Right. You have to be able to recognize the value.
Christianity having taken us there, as he makes the analogy to the booster, the booster, rocket boosters of a spaceship that launches you out of the Earth's atmosphere, right? Yeah. Up there. And having gotten there now, you can dispense with the rocket boosters. You can.
But because it has already taken you
served its purpose.
But the question is, can you maintain what the rocket booster has done? Right.
So he's saying, is it that Christianity is like the rocket booster? It launches you out of it into the atmosphere, into the space, and then now the spaceship can continue on the trajectory without the rocket booster.
I think that's what people like Richard Dawkins that they feel.
Well, he doesn't think Christianity did anything.
Well, true.
No. Yeah, he doesn't attribute any of that to Christianity.
No, but at least he recognized Christian value. He recognized the value of Christian culture.
They pretend that they come from somewhere else. So, because he thinks God is a wicked megalomaniac and homophobic and so. So no. I wouldn't say Richard Dawkins thinks that at all. He thinks we are wicked. He thinks we are bad, and he thinks that children should not be allowed to be raised with Christian parents. That's how bad he thinks of us. But anyway, that's the first idea, that Christianity is like the rocket booster. It pushes society up a certain way, and then the society can continue after that without Christianity, with that work. So he said that there'll be a secular humanist utopia.
Yeah,
there is no evidence that such utopia is being created at all.
Well, I think the communist thing was supposed to be a kind of secular utopia.
But even if you look in countries like the UK and Ireland and the US and Australia, there's no secular human utopia being created there. Anyway,
in fact, the nature of these things is that once you remove God as God and put human beings, then whatever human beings don't like and don't want, this is why freedom of speech is being suppressed in those countries.
Totally suppressed. Okay, so that doesn't work. It seems that doesn't work. Okay, so that's the first option. Then the second option, look, is the Nietzschean option.
Yeah.
Dispense with Christianity and man up and take the consequences.
Yeah, every man for themselves.
And survival of the
fittest. The right. Ubermensch, the Superman,
being at the top.
The Hitler youths.
Right. So that is the second option. Dispense with it, knowing what the consequences are likely to be, and being prepared to take on those consequences.
Yeah, and her see all the things that's alarming. And of course, she's also aware that on the wings is Islam.
Yeah, and she's aware that Islam is riding into these Western democracies on the wings of secularism.
That's right.
So they're thinking that, we are dispensing with Christianity, and they don't realize that that's the beast that they are creating by doing that. Islam is riding into their countries on that beast.
Absolutely.
And then it will take over and it will kill them. Yeah. Okay. So her Siali doesn't find that appealing at all.
Because she was a Muslim.
She was a Muslim.
And she knows what Islam is about.
So she doesn't want that. So the second option is that. Okay. Get rid of Christianity and take whatever comes after. Which we may not like, which I don't think we will like at all.
Yeah.
And then the third option is to return to the foundations. Return to the foundations that gave us these values. Gave us the values of equality of all men. Human rights, international rights, freedom of speech, right to life, all of those things. Go back to the foundations and embrace those things. So what they're saying is that the values, Tom Holland is saying, the values that we hold as natural and universal, they are neither natural nor universal.
Yeah.
And the Bible says the heart of man is wicked above all and deceitful above all and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So we should know they're not natural.
If
they were natural, they would have been present in ancient Rome.
That's right, they would have, but they're not. But what some people say, it is the evolution of human relationship that happens.
As man knows more, he does more evil.
Yeah. So. I think I have to read this scripture that you asked.
We'll read it at the very end.
Yeah, okay.
So I want to make some other points that unless we embrace Christianity, we are going to lose equality, we're going to lose compassion, and we're going to lose human rights. And the last thing I want to say is that Tom Holland talks about Christianity. He doesn't talk about Christ. And this is why I don't think he's reached where he's supposed to.
He hasn't said he's reached. He said
Christianity itself doesn't save anyone.
No, it's
Christianity didn't turn the culture around. It's Christ that did it.
That's right.
And so he needs to recognize the person of Christ.
That's right.
And the claims of Christ and the demands made by Christ. Yeah. And only when he acknowledges those will he be nearer to the truth.
So these people are something like the Church of Laodicea in the book of Revelation chapter 3, and starting from verse 14, Christ says, "And unto the angel of the Church of Laodicea write, these things said the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the beginning of the creation of God. I know thy works, that thou art neither hot nor cold. I wish that thou were hot or cold. So then, because you are lukewarm and neither hot or cold, I will spew you out of my mouth. Because you say, I am rich and increased in goods and have need of nothing, and know not that you are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. I counsel you to buy of me gold tried in the fire, that you may be rich, and white raiment, that you may be clothed, and that the shame of your nakedness does not appear, and that you anoint your eyes with eye salve, that you may see. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous, therefore, and repent." So that is what Europe really has to do. They have to repent and turn back to Christ. Otherwise, this culture will be gone.
It is not adequate to use Christianity to win a culture war. Yeah. Christianity is based on Christ.
Yeah.
What we need is a return to Christ.
Yeah, that's right.
That is what we need to save the culture. Not just a name and an ideology, but a man.
Yeah.
That's where salvation lies, in a man.
This has been the Issachar Hour. We thank you for being with us.
Please join us again next time and ask a friend to be with you as we discuss another interesting topic on the Issachar Hour. Thank you so much for joining us today.